Hello, everyone, and welcome to our brand new show, Advocacy Hour. My name is Malynda Hale, and I'm the Executive Director of the New Evangelicals.
And I'm Rebecca Thomas, Board President of the New Evangelicals. So
Thank you.
excited to be here with you, Malynda.
So glad. I'm so glad we decided to do this. I know we were talking about it for a while, so I'm excited to get this going. So, on this show, we are going to be exploring how people of faith can actively show up in the world for justice, equity, and compassion. And if you're new here, and if you're new to the New Evangelicals, we are a nonprofit that is dedicated to rejecting Christian nationalism and reimagining faith that is inclusive, compassionate, and justice oriented. And this show is just one of the ways that we will be living that out. We're going to be spotlighting different issues, organizations, different people that matter, and how they're taking meaningful action in the world.
Absolutely. And we know that so many of you are looking for ways to really give back and to live out your values, engaging with really important topics that are affecting all of us in society and in culture. And so we thought there's no better way than to lead by example and really help you put your faith into action.
And that is what is so important. And listen, even if you aren't a person of faith, this is for you too. This is for anyone who really cares about building a more just and compassionate, inclusive world, because at the end of the day, what unites us is our humanity and our desire to leave the world better than we found it. It's all about just showing up with kindness and doing good.
Yeah, so each month we're going to dive into a different topic. We'll share important facts with you, provide some context, and also highlight voices and organizations that are doing really powerful work in whatever that topic is of the month. And so we hope that by being part of this with us, that you will leave not only more informed, but also empowered to take action and find new ways to get involved.
So this month, we are going to be focusing on immigration. And this is an issue that is deeply connected to justice and to faith. And it's also been deeply politicized right now. And a lot of people just don't know what to do. They don't know how to help. They don't know how to show up and be there for our immigrant neighbors. And everything that's happening with immigration at its core is really just about people. It's about humans. It's about families and children and individuals that are seeking safety, stability, and hope.
Yeah, so right now we know that immigration is at the forefront of so many national conversations. We're seeing rising tensions at the border, harmful rhetoric around migrants, and then also policy shifts that are really impacting thousands of people every day.
And here's some quick facts that you may not know about immigration. So there are 51.9 million immigrants that live in the United States as of June 2025. 15.4% of all U.S. residents are immigrants. 19% of the U.S. labor force are immigrants. And 66% of undocumented immigrants have lived in the United States for over a decade. Those statistics actually shocked me because I didn't know what those numbers were either. It was really wild to see those numbers.
Yeah, seeing them like that and hearing you say them is just really, really impactful. And we really believe as Christians, we're really called to welcome the stranger. Protecting the vulnerable is really important to us, and also advocating for humane policies because we believe in the dignity of each human being.
You know, Rebecca, I know we've talked about immigration a lot, like even just outside of this show and in our own texts, and we've been really affected by the dehumanization of immigrants. That's something that's really bothered me. And also just seeing a lot of people cheer for how immigration has been handled. And I think that we can agree that we do need immigration reform. There does need to be a better system for how we allow people to seek asylum, how that we allow them to come into this country. But I am very much of the mindset that immigration and immigrants make this country great. You know, we started out with talking about being the great American melting pot, and somewhere along the line, we've ended that mindset, and now people are viewing immigrants as the enemy.
Yeah, it's so disheartening to watch when families are being ripped apart, for example, or people that I know in my life who have been around for decades. Like one of the statistics that you listed off is people living here for more than 10 years, and imagining what it would be like for those families to actually be torn apart that I know. And I know that we probably all know people that could very easily happen to. And so it's such a good reminder that these are human beings, and no matter how long they've been here, it's a big topic. And to your point, I think we could do a much better job with how it's managed, but we can't just say, well, that's it. We're just going to stop everything the way that this seems to be happening more recently.
Right. I think also people don't realize how much immigrants contribute to our economy. And also, they're all here to have a better life. I mean, we sell this big, grandiose picture of the American dream. And so when you are outside of America and you see that, why wouldn't you want to be a part of it, you know? And so I think that we're not giving enough agency to those immigrants that come to this country, want to have a better life, contribute to the economy, are good people, and stay out of harm's way. They aren't criminals. They don't cause anything terrible to people. They're really just trying to be their best to provide for their families. And I don't think that we're seeing those pictures enough. We're not hearing about those stories enough. And I wish people would realize that immigrants aren't just these criminals that they're being painted as. They're humans just like you and I. They have families just like you and I. They have businesses just like you and I, and they just want to thrive.
Yes. I lived in a town in California that is probably 85% Hispanic, I would say, and there's a considerable population of immigrants because it's a very agricultural area. And I love the way that they have brought their culture from Mexico to our city. I love the food. I love the music. I love the way that it enriches our culture. Actually, my kids have grown up around all of these different kind of cultural aspects that they wouldn't have had if it was just the culture I grew up in, right? And so I see it as such an enriching thing to be around people that are not like me, to have my kids be around people that are not necessarily like us. And so for me, it's really sad that we want to limit what an American is to like one way of thinking, right?
Yeah.
Instead of understanding that this melting pot should be about like welcoming the different cultures and how do we actually like appreciate one another and the way that these things impact how we grew up. It makes, I mean, everything I've experienced makes me who I am, right? And so I want to know about these people. And I think to your point of like bringing in more of these stories, if we know these people, then we will see them as human beings, right? And right now they're not even getting due process in a lot of cases. And that's so disheartening considering what we know the Constitution says they deserve, and they're not getting that.
Yes. I mean, there's 2 points that you made. I think the cultural awareness is so beautiful because there are enough statistics and data to show that diversity makes everybody's environment better. You never want to stay in your own little bubble. You want to broaden your horizons. You want to be more aware, but also culture is such a beautiful thing. I mean, I always say go to the food, right? We have so many different types of food. I feel like that everybody's going to go to food, right? But that's a great way to be exposed to somebody's culture and then hear the stories behind it. I know speaking personally, there were a lot of dishes that I grew up with from the South, just from my father, and my mother being born in the South, and you learn the stories behind how those things came to be. And if you use food kind of as a icebreaker or a way to get to know somebody, I think that we would have a lot less fear and a lot less animosity if we do more inner dining experiences with people to learn about their cultures. And I think that people would have, I would hope, a different view of someone from another country from the cultural awareness. You also brought up due process, which we've been seeing has just been completely erased from the conversation lately. But that is what you're right, is being on American soil. Everyone is supposed to be entitled to due process, which leads us to, honestly, who our guest is today and who we're talking to. We're going to be speaking with Erin Mckenny from the nonprofit Just Neighbors. And this is an organization that is doing incredible work to support immigrant communities and push for systemic change.
Yeah, so Just Neighbors is a nonprofit. They provide a lot of immigration legal services to low-income immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers across Virginia, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. And they help guide families through complex legal processes. So as we're seeing, the legal processes have gotten more complex. And so they're helping, whether it's an asylum claim, work permits, family reunification, and even humanitarian visas.
But their impact goes beyond just legal support. Just Neighbors also builds strong, more compassionate communities by educating the public, equipping allies, and advocating for policies that honor the dignity of every single immigrant. And their vision is both simple and profound. It's a world where immigrants and refugees are welcomed, supported, and empowered to thrive, which is why their work aligns so much with TNE. So I want to welcome our guest, Erin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I want to first ask you, what drew you personally to doing immigration justice work? Was there a moment or a story that made this more than a job for you?
Yeah, I think I spent 20 years in corporate America and took an early out and was doing some work at a day shelter. and we were feeding the hungry and the homeless. And I started talking to our guests and trying to understand kind of why they were in the circumstances that they were in. And many were, in fact, undocumented immigrants. And the realization that we were feeding them, which was important to do because they're hungry, but 5 hours later they were hungry again, and trying to think of how do we change the conditions so they're not in that situation anymore. And talking with them, I realized many of them either didn't have access to legal help or really just didn't have a legal pathway under our current structure. So that was a huge influence. I've also done a lot of mission trips to Haiti and Brazil and Mozambique, and really seeing what I would say real poverty is relative to poverty in the United States, and kind of understood why people would immigrate, because in many of those cases, there's no hope. They don't feel like there's any way out. And to your point earlier about the American dream, certainly it's a draw, and people are really just trying to find a way. So when this opportunity came, a number of coincidences and God incidences that kind of aligned me to this opportunity, it just seemed like that's where I needed to be.
So, Erin, at TNE, we do talk a lot about the dignity of every human being, and you talked about that, them seeing this opportunity here in the U.S. and we talked a little bit earlier about the importance of multiculturalism and pluralism. So, I'm wondering, what have you witnessed in your work that reminds you of our shared humanity, maybe even across language or cultural differences?
Well, one of the things that Just Neighbors has done since its founding was really to try to engage people in the pews with the immigrant community. And they've done that through volunteerism. We've always had a very small staff and have tried to leverage the resources that we have through the use of volunteers. But the other side of that is really to connect people who may not otherwise really have a sit-down conversation with an immigrant. And through those connections, people really hear the stories firsthand. And now it's not it's not those other people. It's now somebody I know, somebody I've spent time understanding their situation. And I think it just helps to de-otherize that situation. And when volunteers come into our legal clinics and they sit down with the clients and hear those stories, it really changes them. It really helps them to, they may have been supportive of the issue, but when they know firsthand, to your point earlier, people for a long time, not everybody lives in those environments, multicultural community. A big part of our country is very homogenous in places. And so when you start to make those connections, again, it humanizes the situation. And all of a sudden you do realize, oh, they're a mother, what they've left behind, all of those kinds of things. I think when you realize we're more alike than we are different, then all of a sudden that connection happens. And I've just seen that over and over.
And that's so important because there are definitely a lot of misconceptions about immigrants in this country. And so I want to know from you, what do you wish more people understood about their journey and their everyday struggles of being an immigrant in this country? It may be things that don't necessarily make the news, but that actually weigh heavily on families that other people might actually be able to empathize with.
Yeah, I mean, I think few people really understand the impact U.S. policies, not just recent, but historically have had on other countries. So when we undercut the price of rice to sell it more, to benefit us, in a country like Haiti, it's now cheaper for them to buy rice than it is to grow it. So now you've taken the income away from those people. They move to the city. There's no place to live. There's no jobs. Sending arms, millions of dollars of arms a day to El Salvador. Just many of the U.S. policies have caused or greatly influenced the conditions that have caused people to immigrate. So I think that's something that is lost on most Americans. It's not something we generally study in our history classes. It's not, and there's a lot of political reasons why we do all of those things. So I think that's one thing, is that people don't, we put policies in place that help us, but we don't think about the impact it has on others. I think secondly, what we don't think about immigrants is how hard it is to leave home. I moved from Kentucky to Washington, D.C. That was a hard change, but I could get home. I could go back. When people immigrate, and particularly if they don't come through legal channels, they don't get to go back to see their parents or their children. They don't get to go back to the funerals when their parents die or their siblings die. They're very much isolated and stuck. It's a choice that they've made, but I don't think people understand the sacrifice that these folks are making to try to help their family from where they came and to make a new life and just to have some way to look forward. And you mentioned it earlier. I mean, that's the basis of the United States. With the exception of the natives, we're all immigrants. Some by choice, some by force. But we are. For most people who came to the United States, they came because they were fleeing something or seeking something, and that hasn't changed over 250 years or 450 years. And it's no different. What's different is who's immigrating, how they're coming. The laws have changed. It wasn't a crime to cross the border until 92. So I think there's just a lot of misunderstanding, and I think when you realize people are not there are definitely people who come here just for economic reasons. But in most cases, they're coming here because they have no hope where they're from, and for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Wow, I think that's really such an incredible thing that you said, Erin, just imagining when someone is coming here and they can't go back for the funerals. They can't go back and see their families. And when I consider the impact on that would have on me, it's, if we can think about that in relationship, like that's a heavy thing. And we're not thinking about that with immigrants. And so I really appreciate that you brought that up. You also talked a little bit about the political side of this. And so, I know for me growing up a lot, and I grew up in the Midwest, a lot of immigration debates were really centered around policy, right? And talking points, and not really this experience of knowing immigrants. And so how do you, when talking to people who might be lawmakers or donors or even skeptical neighbors, how do you humanize your clients or, immigrants in general when you're having these conversations? What have you found to be the best way to really humanize the people that you're helping?
I think telling the stories and having the immigrants tell their own stories is probably the most effective. You can cite statistics. You really need to find the things that tug on people's heart or people can relate to. You can talk about, the fact that immigrant crime rates are much lower than citizen crime rates. I mean, there's all kinds of logical data, but that doesn't hit the heart. And I think that's what you have to do, is to kind of cut through the politics of it and say, look, these are real people. Listen to their story. You talk to these folks. I had the privilege of going to El Salvador on a study trip, and we went into a neighborhood that's heavily ganged. And these mothers are saying, by 10 years old, my son has to decide what gang they're in. Why would I not want to get him out of here? But they're trying to change their neighborhood so that's not the case. They're trying to get programs in place so that the kids have a safe place to be. So if you're a 10-year-old boy and you have to choose a gang, what do you think a 10-year-old girl has to do? And so when people can hear that firsthand, and that caused me to take the risk to borrow money, to save every dollar I have, to take the risk of coming here because I did not want my child to have that experience, and I had nowhere else to go. It's very different. And you see that they're trying to change the places at home, but they don't, depending on the country, the governments aren't always cooperative. It's complicated. None of this is simple. And I think that really, and you made the point of we need comprehensive immigration reform, and we absolutely do. I hear people all the time say, I'm not against immigrants, I just want them to come legally. They need to get in line. There is no line.
Right. Yeah.
And people just do not understand that. No. And the rhetoric doesn't allow that to get through.
Not at all.
And
Yeah.
to your point, we've had people here for 10, 20 years who've been here, who've been working, who've been good citizens, honestly, with everything but the official documentation. They have no pathway. They
Mm,
own property, they own businesses, they're employing people. Their kids are
Right.
U.S. citizens. Most of these families are mixed families.
right.
And so I think, again, telling these stories is you've got to make it personal for people. And I've literally had people in church when we talked about putting off our offices in one of the churches, and people say, "Are we going to be a sanctuary? Are we going to do all of this?" And a week later, I just met the loveliest Afghan woman who really needs some legal help, and I'm like, because you sat down and talked to her, and
Right.
you heard her story,
That.
it changed.
Yeah, yeah. It's so important to just talk to people and get to know their stories. And you can break down all of the stereotypes and the assumptions and everything if you just hear people's stories. So I really do appreciate you pointing to that. You also mentioned just how this is a complicated process and situation. And also you talked about how a lot of these families are mixed families, which I find to be interesting because I think people don't understand that that is a challenge in the immigration system, but even like with race, class, language, their legal status, there's a lot to deal with. So how does Just Neighbors address all of those layers and all of those variables when you're helping your clients, but do it in like a holistic way?
Um, yeah, I mean, our specialty is the legal services aspect, and we kind of we work very hard to stay in our swim lane because we get tugged all the time to try to do
Yeah.
more stuff. But we partner very closely because we have such a large geographic footprint, and every county, every state has different services and so forth. We do work very closely with the social services around our footprint. So when we see needs that family have that we can connect them to, we do that. And often there's things going on in the families that actually kind of prevent them from moving forward with their immigration because of trauma, because of stress, because so if they're about to lose their housing, if they don't have enough money for food, a lot of times we have to kind of help them address those situations before they can really focus on their legal status. So we don't try to replicate. We try to partner with the social services organizations, the county and state organizations that support those things. The biggest challenge is language services. It's easy in an area like the Washington metropolitan area, where there are plenty of bilingual speakers and employees. Most of the county governments have multiple languages available, and so forth. You get out into the rural parts of our states, there's a couple counties that have zero Spanish-speaking employees in their human services organizations. So sometimes we end up trying to help interpret, at least initially. It's complicated. Their needs are often much greater because they don't have access necessarily to healthcare. They're scared. They've been traumatized. That either caused them to leave on their journey here or since they've been here. And that adds a layer of complication as well. So we work to be trauma informed and to create a safe environment for our clients. Try to connect them to other resources when they need it. You're also dealing with cultural barriers to things like therapy,
Yeah.
and language availability for therapy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so, we we do what we can. It's never enough. But we work at it all the time, and we try to build the partnerships with the other organizations that can provide kind of that wraparound connection.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. The idea of staying kind of, you said swim in your own lane, I think is so important because so often new nonprofits will pop up doing the same work and you can't really leverage the resources in a broader way. And so I love that you talked about the wraparound care and also the trauma-informed piece. People, survival mode, you can't get out of that until you feel safe. And so you talked about that with the trauma-informed care and all of that. And I think we take for granted that it's easy to just get in line, like you said. And there's just so many pieces to this. Malynda and I talk all the time about nuance and, being able to hold two truths at the same time. And I think immigration is such a good picture of that. it is so complex, and there's so much going on at one time. I know you have a lot of volunteers also who work with your organization. So do you have any stories of any volunteers that maybe were really transformed through the work? Maybe they
Yeah.
felt, like, I'm just going to try this out, but what stories do you have about that?
There's a bunch. The very short story is one of our volunteer attorneys. He had retired from a large law firm, came in and probably did some legal clinics, and then he became a volunteer attorney and was starting to work more. He's gotten so engaged. He now does yoga. He leads us in yoga once a week in our office. He is like, when we need help with the citizenship, he's the one. He'll take it, and if he has to drive the people to their appointments, he's just all in. And he came from the big corporate law world, but just a huge heart. And I think that opportunity, he's actually been there longer than anybody on the staff, to give you some idea. But I also had a volunteer who's actually a former boss of mine in the corporate world. And I said, you need to come do this. And she came and did a legal clinic. We use the volunteers. So I called her the next day. I said, well, how'd it go? What'd you think? And she said, I had to sit in the parking lot for 30 minutes and cry before I could drive home. I'm like, oh my goodness, what happened? And the family that she was working with was a family of 4. They had status. They were ready to adjust their status to get their green cards, but it was going to cost them $4,800 in filing fees. And they didn't have that. So the only way they were going to get that was to take the time to save up, sacrifice whatever, to get enough money to do the filing. And it just kicked her in the gut, quite honestly. And she came back to me and she says, I'm paying their filing fees. And she made a donation and covered them. We have a number of volunteers who end up doing that. But she ended up becoming a very engaged volunteer. She was on our board for a while, and really became a huge advocate. And it's just, it's humbling. And the way the family reacted was there was no expectation on their part. They didn't expect anybody to come in. So they're just like, okay, well, maybe we just pay for the kids first and then we'll keep working, and I mean, they're not about, they weren't about begging for help or seeking financial aid. They were just like, okay, we'll figure it out. It may take us a while, and that's very typical. And so, so when the clients walk out like, and we don't encourage that. We don't have any expectations of our volunteers to do that. I can't tell you how often they're like, can we pay? Can we help? Can we contribute?
Oh, wow.
And it's just because, again, it's personal now.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of challenges, obviously, in this work, but I'm really grateful for what you do. And I love that volunteers are being able to meet immigrant families and maybe have their perspectives change. But despite the challenges, what's giving you hope? And where do you see signs that things can really get better for immigrants and refugees in this country? I know that's a big question.
And right now it's hard to find, honestly.
Yeah.
When you pick up the paper and you look at the stories happening. But honestly, it's the resilience of the immigrants that gives me hope. When you realize what they've sacrificed, what they've come through, and they know these challenges because we're educating them on what's happening, and in their personal situation, what it looks like, what their likelihood, what could happen. And they're like, okay, we'll figure it out. If this happens, this is what we'll do. I mean, they're terrified, but they're also the most resilient people I've ever met. It gives me hope that people are stepping up to protest, to help fund, to accompany immigrants to hearings and things like that. There is a resistance to this anti-immigrant rhetoric and action, quite honestly. And you have to, for us, we have to just recognize we can't help everyone. You have to focus on the pure joy when we get to hand somebody their green card and say, you're a legal permanent resident now, and you're safe. At least we think you're safe. But the joy and the relief for them it's equally for us. And you have to focus on those wins. And it's like the starfish story. You can't throw all of them back into the sea, but the ones you can really make a difference for, and that's what keeps us going. And just, to see these folks thrive once they can get their status and just overcome their trauma and just be able to successfully launch their lives is kind of what keeps us going every day.
Yeah, I love beautiful. Erin, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing the beautiful work and the beautiful stories. Can you let everyone know where they can find Just Neighbors, and if they want to get involved and volunteer, what they should do?
Our website is justneighbors.org. There's a link to volunteer opportunities. We're in the Washington, Virginia, and Maryland footprint. We have a variety of volunteer opportunities. You don't have to be an attorney. You don't have to speak Spanish. It helps. But there's plenty of things to do. We also have a donation page on there. And so, yeah, I mean, and we have a lot of our stories. So if you want to just read some of these client stories, it's a great way to get a sense of who we're working with. And so, yeah.
Great. Well, we will link all of those links for you, and everyone will be right back after a short break.
The New Evangelicals started out as an Instagram post, and 5 years later, it's turned into a nonprofit organization committed to creating a better path forward.
We have educational content, digital media, and a really inclusive online community space. And we're really trying to help people reclaim and hold on to their faith without sacrificing any of their values.
I was looking for people who were sharing stories and being authentic as they worked through their faith in this current context.
In a world that continues to use Christ as a weapon against the marginalized, the New Evangelicals creates a space where all are welcomed and loved as and because of who they are. There's nothing more Christ-like than that.
I think the time we're in really allows TNE to show up in a way we haven't really seen before. And being an organization that talks about the intersection of faith, politics, and culture, we're really trying to build a justice-centered movement.
We really had to ask, what if faith could be different? What if it wasn't about fear and control and shame, but was truly about love, justice, and compassion? And our mission is really simple. We want to empower people to reject Christian nationalism, advocate for their neighbors, and stay rooted in the things that Jesus taught.
I love that TNE celebrates curiosity.
Man, the gospel is needed now more than ever. The New Evangelicals is doing the work of spreading that gospel. And I'm so proud to be a part of the New Evangelicals doing this work.
We envision a world where Christianity isn't used as a tool for power and exclusion, but it's reclaimed as a force for good, for empathy and collective liberation and inclusivity.
Thousands of people have found us, whether it's on our Instagram or YouTube or podcast, and they've had their journey and their feelings validated. And honestly, I'm really proud of that. We're really proud of that.
This is TNE, and we're just getting started. All right, you guys, thank you so much for tuning into our first episode of Advocacy Hour, and a big thank you to our guest, Erin Mckenny from Just Neighbors. Make sure you check out the organization, volunteer if you can, support them if you can. Also, remember to sign up for our online platform and app, TNE Connect. That is where you're going to be able to access our new hub called TNE Action, and this is going to be filled with information on today's guests, their organization, and other resources to help you get involved specifically on immigration, ways that you can support immigrants and other asylum seekers right now. So go to thenewevangelicals.com/connect to join that platform and access that hub.
Yes, and this is just one of the ways that you can show up. So however you choose to give back, whether it's through volunteering, donating, advocating, or simply learning and sharing the truth, like Erin mentioned, there are stories on their website. You can support them in that journey, and we'll be bringing you new topics in the future. So we just really believe that change starts with us, and together doing the work is the only way that we can really, truly create a more compassionate and just world.
And until next time, let's just keep showing up, speaking out, and of course, putting our faith into action. Bye, you guys.